How do I navigate the line between practicing self-control, or tapasya, and suppression? At what point does it become detrimental to give up something I enjoy for my own spiritual growth?
That's a very good question. And that ability to know when we're ready to move, really to take our next step forward, and to ask ourselves, when are we just simply maybe not being honest with ourselves, or trying so hard on the path to move forward that we literally simply, suppression is a psychological term, of course. So with all of our psychological will and might, like this, can you see my fist? Which is different than willingness, which is different than what it means to be able to open to our next moment of spiritual growth. They're very different things. Suppression never serves us spiritually. So we don't even want to hold it like that, even in moments where we have to continue to do our best to move away from habits or thought forms, which are in some ways very much the same, or just the ways we've become accustomed to moving, to move into a spiritually elevated place. There are times where that's very difficult for us, but it's still not the same as just pure suppression. Suppression is always going to come back, and suppression is always going to make itself known. So we have to constantly be holding that habit, that behavior, whatever it is, again, sometimes just the way we think, up to God, up into God's love. We have to constantly be remembering to ask for God's help when we're trying to move beyond a habit. And we all know, if I'm just to be honest here, that there are moments when we cannot do that. We can't let go of that yet. There was such genius, such purity of spiritual teaching, really, when Swamiji taught us to always say to ourselves, I haven't been able to do this, whatever the this is, yet. Always holding open the possibility, the knowing, not the possibility, but the knowing that that will come. For him, it was quitting smoking. He just kept saying to himself, I haven't been able to do this yet, which implies, but I will. And I think when we have a habit that we can't let go of, one of the ways to keep moving forward with it is to invite God into it with us. No matter what it is, ask God to be there with you. Remember, and this is so important, Master told us, God doesn't mind our mistakes. What he minds is our indifference, and what he wants only is our love. So even if there are times where we are behaving in ways that we know is not a behavior that has been purified by God's love, it's not a behavior that's in and of itself going to be moving us closer to our divine nature, the very act of insisting that God come and be there with us changes the nature of it. It just simply does. And remember this is also from Master. Master said, a saint is a sinner who never gave up. We cannot think of ourselves as sinners, no matter what we're doing, no matter how horrible we think it is. That is not how God sees us. God sees us as perfect beings. He sees us as his children who are making the decisions that all of us as prodigal sons need to make. When will we be able to turn around and move back towards God? And that act of saying to God, Divine Mother, come and be with me right now, come and be with me. That is our way of making spiritual progress. The action is never quite as meaningful as our intention. Remember that. It's very important. God is watching our heart.
There is tremendous civil unrest.
Lakshmi, I just want to add one more thing to that answer. Everything I said, I feel is the truth. And I want to say it is important for us to be stretching ourselves. And the very nature of a stretch is that it takes us just beyond our point of comfort without doing injury. So it's not good for us spiritually to then say, as long as I'm inviting God, I can keep doing this. I remember one time I wrote to Jyotish. Somebody had been coming to me for spiritual counsel, and we had spent a lot of time talking about a behavior that this person was not at all proud of, but had not been able to let it go yet. So he was behaving in a way that he knew was not good for his spiritual growth, but he had found himself to be powerless over it. And we had spent a long time talking about it. And I wrote to Jyotish. I did not, of course, reveal who the person was, but I said to him, here's what the behavior is. Do you have any suggestions? And Jyotish wrote back. He was just as loving and respectful as he ever is, saying to me, I'm sure you've thought of all of this. I'm sure you, Shanti, I wasn't really thinking of any of it, but we both knew this, whatever he was about to say, he was saying, a lot of this has come through. But he said, make sure that you tell this person that Master has said we have no control over the first moment when that thought comes into our mind. But after that, we need to jump in and take control. So as much as possible, when the thought comes for a behavior, smoking a cigarette, whatever it is. One of the questions I read this morning was about committing adultery. And worse, things can be worse. They can always be worse. We all need to gather whatever spiritual power we have, whatever inner strength, whatever gets added by calling on God, and say no. And that is not hurting us. That is not mere suppression. that is in finding our own spiritual power, inviting God in, and raising our energy. So I did not in any way want to imply that as long as we're inviting God to be there with us, it's enough. We do need to keep stretching. We just need to know, feel that line where it's a perfect stretch, and maybe 3 times out of 5, we won't need to go back to that behavior. But even when we do, we have God with us.